Welcome to the bay window of a terraced house in Newcastle for this bite-sized public lecture. How long have I got, Doctor? Only a few weeks now, Bryan, I'm afraid. You'll be 70 soon and you'll have to get into the intensive care unit before then if you want a ventilator. That's not a real conversation, just a dramatic way of declaring a conflict of interest. As with any discussion of an ethical issue, there's no view from nowhere. Where the stakes are high, as here, it can be hard to distinguish one's self-serving arguments from one's well-founded ones. Sometimes they can lead to the same conclusions. Where the stakes are high, emotions run high and can cloud our reasoning. In 1984, John Bowker delivered the Riddell Lectures in Newcastle. One had the title, "About What Are We Approximately Wrong?" I want to apply this sense of limitation to what I'm going to say. Where so much is uncertain, one of the few certainties is that it's unwise to claim that you're making the right decisions at the right time, when hindsight may show why you weren't. What I have just said is my attempt at managing your expectations. An argument frequently used in public discussion of COVID-19 is that the consequence of particular choices is that different people will die prematurely. Decisions about ending lockdown, limiting testing, and minimizing just-in-case stockpiling of personal protective equipment all have this effect. I'm not trivializing the value of life when I say that we are content to do a trade-off with other values in different spheres of life. Car design, road design, laws relating to speed, alcohol consumption, and safety belts have all contributed to road deaths falling to around a quarter of the total in 1960. Tragic though each road death is, society accepts this reduced figure as the human cost of our transport arrangements. There could be lower speed limits, reduced permitted alcohol levels, slower acceleration, as well as physical barriers between cyclists, pedestrians, and vehicles. All these would reduce road deaths further, but also involve more expenditure. I could have used the availability of cigarettes or the pricing of sugary drinks relative to fresh fruit and vegetables to make a similar point. While spending more is often an option in resource allocation, there are occasions when it's not. There's a limited number, say, of organs available for transplantation. Changing the law and encouraging families to discuss their wishes may increase this number, but actually only a small number of people die in circumstances where their organs can feasibly be transplanted. At the moment, there's a limited supply of ICU beds. Nightingale hospitals have been built at impressive speed to deal with this shortage, but it's impossible to find and train an adequate number of competent staff in a similarly short time. Unsurprisingly, specialists are called specialists because they specialize, and ICU specialists develop skills that other clinicians don't possess or indeed need. Now, there are strong arguments for saying that a government that puts a pandemic high on its risk register should make more programs. And the question I am asking is that given limited resources, how can these resources be allocated fairly? When discerning the best option, the ideal is generally unattainable. The goal is the least worst option. In an ideal world, there would be enough ICU beds for everybody who needs one. Or would there? Even that statement is not as straightforward as it sounds. Who needs an ICU bed? Is an ICU bed necessarily a good thing? Overall, around half the patients with COVID-19 who enter intensive care come out alive. Some people have a much lower chance of surviving. It really isn't a good place to die, kind though the staff will be. There isn't, though, a formula for weighing the value of a peaceful death against the value of a longer life. Whatever the odds of either outcome, it will be 100% of an individual who will experience any particular result. A patient doesn't have to be deeply depressed to prefer to take their chances in a general ward or even stay at home, aware that they're more likely to die there. As Kath Mannix says in her outstanding book, With the End in Mind, there's great value in having a mature discussion about measures we would like taken as we approach death. In an American study in 2017, over half of those aged over 85 who'd been admitted to ICU were dead within a year. The researchers didn't report the state of health of those who were alive after a year, but a proportion of them would have had a degree of brain damage or other serious problems. Did all those people actually want a bed in intensive care? John Harris memorably said, "My life is as important to me as your life is to you, because my own life would be better and of even more value to me if I were healthier, fitter, had more money, more friends, more lovers, more children, more life expectancy, more everything I want. It doesn't follow that others are entitled to decide that because I lack some or all of these things, I'm less entitled to healthcare resources or less worthy to receive those resources than are others, or that those resources would somehow be wasted on me." Well, it depends on the question asked. Is your life as valuable as mine? Answer, yes. Is each year of your life as valuable as each year of mine? Answer, yes. However, if it's likely that you will have a lot more years than I, anyone allocating an intensive care bed to me would actually be enhancing the value of each year of my life. But be cautious. Will you have more years than I? Many younger people who need an intensive care bed have medical conditions that adversely affect their chance of survival. Now, an argument that's used to justify age-related restriction of access to healthcare is called the fair innings argument. It's based on the idea that everyone should be given the opportunity to reach a certain age, and that curative medicine should be dedicated to enabling this. On reaching a certain age, a person is no longer eligible for life-prolonging treatment, although they would be cared for. It's an interesting metaphor. Once you are caught or bowled, you're out. You don't get another chance. Teams that play poorly score fewer runs. Now, there are dangers in taking a metaphor too far, but just as however much you practice, you may still be a poor batsman, you may have a body that wears out more quickly and doesn't give you a good chance of surviving intensive care. This isn't a judgment on an individual's responsibility for health, nor on the value of their life, But if their life expectancy is lower than mine because of their pre-existing health conditions, each of their potential years shouldn't be valued more than mine. Those who are not self-isolating acknowledge that standing in a supermarket queue 2 meters apart is fair. Although even here there are special provisions applying to NHS staff and the vulnerable. I could say more about them in questions. The principle of first come, first served applies when there's no reason to distinguish one person's need from another. Supermarket staff don't check whether a customer has actually run out of bread and give them priority over those who are buying a loaf to put in the freezer just in case. Arguably, anyone who needs an ITU bed to have a chance of surviving COVID-19 has as great a need as anyone else. Many commentators discount the idea of a lottery in making resource allocation decisions as trivializing the value of life. Of course, using the word lottery encourages this view. Suppose instead that we spoke of bad luck. Some lives are cut short by a disabling illness like multiple sclerosis. Others end in an air crash. Many who listen to this lecture will have friends and family members who have been unlucky to have their life shortened unexpectedly. Such experiences do nothing to trivialize the value of life. If I go to my local supermarket and the person in front of me takes the last bag of flour, I'm unlucky. No one has judged me less worthy of receiving that flour. Now, Western medical ethics has become accustomed to the primacy of autonomy as a principle. But we must distinguish the two ways in which the word is used. Autonomy conveys the negative right not to be touched without permission. This underpins the concept of informed consent in medicine. It contrasts with a positive right to have what one desires, which is limited by its effect on others. The concept of autonomy has given intellectual respectability to controlling our lives, and it's very attractive. This is hardly surprising. Offered the binary option of master or slave, few of us would choose slavery. But it is also an illusion. We have no control over perhaps one of the most important determining factors, over where we're born. I recently heard an Indian doctor saying that those who share a toilet with several other households are in a position where they have considerable difficulty in keeping 2 meters away from their neighbors. This deification of autonomy has made Western thinkers less willing to accept the place of random luck. It's a form of hubris, human pride, this idea that we are, or indeed should be, in control. Norman Daniels and Daniel Sabin emphasize the importance of a fair process in resource allocation. They acknowledge that it's hard to reach any agreement about fairness, and they call for 4 features of a fair process for deciding. First, it has to be well publicized. Second, it should take account of the factors that anyone considering the issue would believe is reasonable. Being ginger-haired wouldn't be a reason for withholding a resource, but an inability to benefit would be. Thirdly, there should be an opportunity to appeal. And finally, the process should be enforced. I haven't seen any UK commentator suggest that ICU beds and ventilators should be allocated on the basis of who can pay for them. I share the view that it would be grossly unfair, but I'm left wondering whether this will have an effect on society's values once COVID-19 is no longer the centre of our attention. An important feature of any system for allocating ICU beds is that it needs to be simple to apply. Statistically, it's easy to estimate life expectancy. Clinicians can also estimate a person's likelihood of survival. They may get this wrong, but there's a rational, albeit imperfect, evidence base for such calculations. This may help distinguish between two patients who arrive at the same time. Patients only do this in philosophy seminars. In a messy clinical world, a bed can be allocated to patient A. Patient B, with a much greater chance of surviving longer, arrives an hour later, but wasn't expected. The phrase bad luck sounds so casual. I think it may be better to call this a grave misfortune. A reasoned process can take us so far in sharing resources fairly. Those who don't want intensive care shouldn't have it forced upon them. There are some who have little chance of benefiting. Giving as many extra years as possible to the population affirms the equal value of each of those years. Some people will die who would not have died had a different decision-making process been in place. Joining a queue at a busy time is indeed unfortunate. Acknowledging that our well-reasoned decisions may be no more satisfactory than chance is humbling. Humility is an appropriate reaction to the uncertainty and loss of control that COVID-19 has created. Thank you. Keep well and keep safe.